Rachel, one of the sources of income volatility is people's work hours and the variability of that schedule. Can you tell us some about the work that you've been doing on trying to give people more control over their schedules?
Sure. I mean, we have a sort of few different angles, right? One is legislation, right? So trying to mandate that employers take sort of common sense steps around giving people more notice of their work schedules, giving people the opportunity to work full time if they want to work full time, or even part time but more hours than they're currently getting. We're working a lot on sort of high road engagement with employers as well. There's a lot of evidence that some of adopting these practices has really strong positive impacts for employers in terms of reducing unexpected absences, reducing turnover, which can be very costly, increasing employee engagement and productivity and all of those kinds of things. So we are pursuing sort of both those angles. My work primarily more on the policy side. And so the sort of policy proposal has to do with advance notice of schedules, some incentives to encourage employers to actually stick with the schedules once they're posted, and then offering hours of work to existing part-time employees before you hire new people. So this sort of countering this trend of spreading out, let's say, 50 FTEs worth of employment over 120 people where nobody's really getting the hours they need to live on.
Marissa, one of the challenges of dealing with income volatility is we can think about it in two ways. One is trying to eliminate the volatility itself. Another is equipping people with more tools to deal with it when they do have volatility. How do you think about the two sides of that coin, mitigation versus prevention?
Yeah, I mean, so, we've been having conversations a lot at Kellogg around sort of the quality jobs argument, right, and how critical that is to addressing the root causes of volatility. On the other side of the coin, understanding that access to short-term savings, access to affordable credit, access to real-time payments, right, or to real-time wages is an important part of the solution as well, right, and being able to mitigate the impact that not having predictable scheduling and not having sufficient hours can play in your balance sheets. And so, I think it's a both and set of solutions, looking at the prevention, root causes, really looking at what's happening with employers, and then also the mitigation side as well.
Another thing that we haven't talked about as much is also like on the sort of mobility within the workforce, because I think one of the things that's challenging if you look at low-wage sectors is that not only are people's current experience of their job bad, they see no opportunity. It's like, why would I stick this out? It's not going to get better. There is no reward. If I've been in this job for 8 years and they're never going to make me a supervisor. There are no pathways to more stability. Particularly like in retail, there's a huge amount of gender and racial segregation, occupational segregation, which is, I think plays into the labor market participation a little bit. So, I mean, one of the things that CPD does, my organization has like a multi-issue campaigns, right? So we also have a campaign called Fed Up that's around sort of looking at some of the even more macro factors in the economy, right? So we see that involuntary part-time work, which is really just, I think, one piece of the kind of part-timing that is problematic just because of the way that the data is collected. But it's, it spiked during the recession. It's starting to go down, but the rates are still disproportionately high for communities of color. So I think there are things on the sort of like monetary policy that are also going to be necessary, even if you then deal with the sort of employment relationship.
Marissa, the reason we care about income volatility is because it actually affects households. And that's particularly a problem for families with children. And that's one of the things that Kellogg cares a lot about. How do you think about income volatility in relation to the knock-on effects for families with young children?
I mean, so we do know, and research has stated this, that, kids that grow up in families that are that are financially stable are doing much better in terms of all sorts of outcomes, right? Including literacy, numeracy, ability to access quality early childhood education opportunities. I emphasize the stability part because we also know there's some research that recently came out from Pew and others that what workers and families most value is the stability piece.
Rachel, too, but a piece of that sort of flexibility is, particularly for households, your kid gets sick and you can't go to work that day. So there's a sort of the paid leave issue. Do you think there's a conflict there on the sort of the paid leave versus the predictability? How does that work for employers who, even under the best of intentions, are trying to sort of work with both my workers need predictability, but I also need to allow some of my workers to miss a day with very little notice?
Yeah, I mean, so one thing is that a lot of employers pre-plan. I mean, if you have a large workplace, some percentage of your workforce is going to be out on a given day. And there are employers that, they look at their past data and they staff up to accommodate the absolutely predictable call-ins, right? It may not be exactly predictable how many there will be, but within a range. And so then you don't need to sacrifice other workers' predictability in order to make sure you have adequate staffing when people call out. But I mean, I think another thing that we've seen in some of the places where employers have moved to provide a different framework around predictability and stability is that it actually can decrease the number of unplanned absences, right? So, some people are calling in sick because there's a true last minute emergency that they couldn't have predicted. Some people call in sick because their schedule was created in a way that didn't accommodate their pre-existing needs, and that's their only option, right? And so certainly we want to make sure that that we don't sort of impact sick leave utilization, but I think what employers are starting to see is that when they provide more flexibility, they actually see fewer of these unplanned absences because people can better, I think especially for low-wage workers, they don't expect to have total control over their schedule. They're like, if you tell me my schedule, I will plan around it, right?
Right.
But when they can't plan around it, then they're sort of forced into these other circumstances.
Right.